Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson, the producer and host of this TV series for the OLYMPIA Fellowship of Reconciliation. Since 1987, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues related to peace, social and economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. This month, we will explore how we can strengthen the grassroots movements for two issues we care about. One is protecting our community's environment and climate from fossil fuels, and the other major issue we'll address is reforming several aspects of our electoral systems and how to strengthen democracy. We'll share some recent and current progress and the plan for the work that we need to do next. And we will explore how to devise smart strategies so we can more effectively inform and engage the public to help us move ahead. Two expert guests will help us explore these topics. Both are senior research associates for the Sightline Institute, a very smart nonprofit organization based in Seattle. Tarika Powell graduated from Vanderbilt University Law School and has an additional master's degree. She also brings her expertise in environmental law to her work at Sightline Institute, where she researches and analyzes energy policy and infrastructure. Good to have you here, Tarika.
Thanks for the invitation.
And Margaret Morales earned her master's degree from the University of British Columbia's Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability. She also has additional education and experience in the environment, and she serves on Sightline's democracy research team. Good to have you here, Margaret.
Thanks for having me.
We will have a good time. And I think the viewers will too, because this will be interesting stuff that people will like to hear. For a number of years, I've been reading the materials that your organization, the Sightline Institute, has been producing, and I've found Sightline's information to be well-informed, strategically smart, and very practical. I especially appreciate what your coworker, Anna Fahey, has written to help people devise strategies to help with effective messaging. And Margaret, I wonder if you could say something that would summarize Anna Fahey's approach to strategizing and messaging.
Sure, yeah. Anna is our senior communications, tell me her full title. Senior Communications Strategy Director. So she thinks about how do we communicate our messages in ways that are effective and get past people's biases, people's assumptions, to have good conversation. And so she kind of works on each of our research areas and thinks about how do we communicate well about that topic. And kind of what I think is the heart of Anna's work, what she keeps coming back to, is all the stats and facts are great, but you have to speak from a place of values. That's how you really talk to people.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago before the taping here, she put out a thing saying we need to do values sandwiches. So you lay out some values that the people you're trying to reach can connect with, then you lay out the facts that relate to those values, and then you reaffirm those values, and that's the way to do it. Now, I've been doing that intuitively, and I was happy to see that she was advocating that sort of thing as well. How do you see Anna's work?
Well, Anna's work is really valuable for not just for us at Sightline, but for lots of individuals who are working towards different topics that would improve the environment around them, improve their society. And her work really focuses on how do you reach people. So at Sightline, we are a think tank, right? So we deal in a lot of facts and information. And even if our facts and information are on the side of the truth, it's not necessarily easy to reach people if you first approach them with all these facts and information, especially about topics that we get very excited about, right? Mm-hmm. We might want to talk about all of the volatile organic compounds that are going to be released by a facility. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily going to reach a person who is not already engaged in the issue. So what you want to do is to reach them based on what you were just talking about. What are their values? We all have shared values. We all want a brighter future for our children. We all want clean air. We all want clean water. So focusing on what people's values are so that you can deliver your message to them is what Anna's work really centers around. And I was just joking with Margaret that I didn't know why she asked me her title, because we really don't, focus on titles at Sightline. We focus on the work. But that's really what Anna's work is all about.
Yeah, great. And that's what hooked me into being supportive of Sightline Institute. I want to start with you on the substantive issues that you work on, Tarika. I'm impressed with your research and writing, and I've read a number of things that each of you has written about the things you work on. I'm impressed with your research and writing about fossil fuels in our Pacific Northwest region. And you say that right here in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia, we're kind of like a thin green line, a barrier that prevents the export of fossil fuels, because they would get burned and we'd be getting the greenhouse gases back and coming at us. Tell us about that thin green line concept.
Well, the thin green line is a phrase that we came up with at Sightline in order to talk about the work that the people of the Pacific Northwest are doing to fight what an onslaught of proposals from the fossil fuel industry. What we're seeing right now is basically an attempt to give the Pacific Northwest what I like to refer to as a Gulf Coast makeover.
Yes.
So we have had an onslaught of proposals for coal, oil, and fracked gas terminals here in the Pacific Northwest. And we have likewise had an outpouring of opposition to that from the people who live in this region. And the reason that we call it the thin green line is that, as you know, in the Gulf Coast, there's a big fossil fuel industry there because there's lots of fossil fuel resources there. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we don't have those resources. But what's attractive about us is our location. We have a very close proximity to Asian ports where the fossil fuel companies are trying to export the fuels. The fuels being mined in the Rocky Mountain states, the interior of the US, in Alberta, the interior of Canada, and the fossil fuel companies are trying to establish major terminals along the coast of the Pacific Northwest to get those products to Asia. And if we can stop that onslaught here, then we will have a hand in keeping those fossil fuels in the ground.
Right.
So what we mean by thin green line is the line that stops that plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. And I appreciate you, when we were talking on the phone to prepare for this interview, you mentioned that national borders are really artificial.
Yeah.
And I'm really pleased that you work with Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia.
Right.
And the people in the climate movement, which I'm a part of, have done a lot of work across all of these borders. And like in Canada, the First Nations people have been very strong, just like the Native Americans in the US. And there's a group in BC called Dogwood that does good stuff, and they're challenging all their stuff. And I mean, everybody's like working together regionally, which is what we need to do.
Yeah, and the reason that we include British Columbia in the work that we do is like exactly what you said. These borders are man-made, they're artificial.
Right.
If there is a heavy polluting industry in BC that is near the San Juans, that's near Washington, that's going to be affecting the Salish Sea, it's also going to affect us even if the project is on the other side of that man-made border. So we really need to be looking at what the impacts are throughout Cascadia.
Right, and the First Nations, the tribal nations, of course, predated our colonization of the areas, and they've been really on the front lines. These are frontline communities. You've referred to them, and other people have referred to them as the Quinault, the Lummi. Lots of folks are saying, we got to stop this and protect our way of life, our culture, and our natural resources. Your nonprofit organization, the Sightline Institute, has been focusing on some possible fossil fuel projects in our region. Could you summarize what's going on with methanol on the Columbia River, that proposal, or any others? But there's a bunch of them, and we learn about this one, that one is like an overwhelming pattern.
Yeah, it can seem overwhelming. One of the projects that we are dealing with right now is that we have this company called Northwest Innovation Works It is a company that is a corporate arm of the Chinese government, and Northwest Innovation Works is the American arm of that corporation. And they are trying to build methanol terminals here in the Pacific Northwest. The size of these terminals is gargantuan. There was a proposed terminal in Tacoma. It would have been the largest methanol terminal in the world. Methanol is basically a wood alcohol. It's derived from, it's a petrochemical. That means that it's derived from fossil fuels. In this case, it would be derived from fracked gas. And so after the proposal in Tacoma was defeated, we're left with two methanol proposals on the Columbia River that would use extreme amounts of water to produce the methanol, produce toxic chemicals, and of course the methanol itself is obviously highly flammable and toxic chemical. And so there is a proposal right now in Kalama that is the proposal that has gotten furthest ahead in the permitting process, which is one of the things that we're focusing on at Sightline and trying to educate people about what methanol is, what will be the impacts to the community. The community in Kalama, there has been a, much like we saw in Tacoma, a lot of opposition from the citizens there who are saying, you know, we do want jobs and industry in our city, but this is not what we want.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, people, these things are kind of like dumped on us, and they're like, this is what you got to have, and people have a right and the need to say, no, this is not a good source of jobs. We need some jobs that aren't going to kill us,
Right.
Or destroy our water supplies, or give our kids cancer, or whatever.
Right. And when you talk about appealing to values, one of the
Yeah.
things that fossil fuel companies will try to appeal to is the fact that everybody wants jobs.
Yeah.
You know, this is an emotional appeal. And so when they come into a community, they will sort of focus on that almost exclusively.
Yeah.
And then, you know, our role is to come in and say, well, here are the other things that this will bring to the community
Yeah.
to provide people with the information so they can make an informed decision.
Yeah, disrupt your water resources, give your kids cancer. There's lots of downsides that the
Yeah.
fossil fuel companies are not
Yeah,
going to
you'll get 12 jobs,
acknowledging.
but let's talk about what else is going to happen here.
Yeah. People in Thurston County and 10 other counties in Washington get electricity and natural gas from a giant corporation, Puget Sound Energy, PSE, that in turn is now owned by a much larger conglomerate based in Australia, very remote, very neglectful of us. PSE wants to build a big facility in Tacoma to do some things with liquefied natural gas, LNG. Tell us about that.
Well, we've seen a lot of proposals in the Pacific Northwest for liquefied natural gas export terminals. This facility wouldn't be an export terminal, but what it would be doing is broader, much broader in scope than any existing LNG facility in the U.S. So it's not bigger in size, but it's bigger in scope. And with each additional activity that the facility would be carrying out, it introduces a new safety hazard. So one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at this facility that is proposed in Tacoma by Puget Sound Energy is that the safety analysis was very inadequate. And you know, we have an environmental assessment process that happens for any project that gets proposed. That process captures a lot of the safety concerns that people may have as well. And what we found with this facility is that there were several areas in which the environmental assessment process wasn't carried out in a way that would protect the public. The project goes against numerous safety recommendations for LNG terminals that have been established by the American Bureau of Shipping, Society of International Gas Tanker and Terminal Operators. So one of the first things I noticed was that it was not following any, practically any safety recommendations. Second thing I noticed was that there was hardly any input from the community. Tacoma City government, which is the lead agency on analyzing the environmental and safety impacts, did not do an adequate job of notifying the public. No one knew that this project was going on. So the environmental assessment process is supposed to allow members of the public to give their feedback. Those members of the public may be Joe Schmo, who just, has an interest and wants to say something. It might be someone who has a PhD in this topic area, liquefied natural gas, and then they can give their feedback on the safety and other standards. Well, that whole part of the process was missing, and that was one of the other major issues with the project, was complete lack of public notification and involvement.
Yeah, I know in some places the fire chief will say, hey, wait a minute, we just can't handle this. Or local health professionals will say, wait a minute, this is going to cause all kinds of ripple effects that you're not anticipating, and as a health professional, I'm concerned about those. And all kinds of people, like you say, the PhD example that you had, but it ranges not just from academia but into practical areas like fire safety and lots of other things.
Right, and when you have those people being able to participate in the environmental assessment process, what you have is the final project winds up being safer. And that was completely lacking in this process, and so what we're seeing now is that the final project is going to be very unsafe for that community.
Can we just touch on two more things before we move on? One is there's this notion that the fossil fuel industry has put out that natural gas is clean, and people who know that that's not true, but that's their propaganda line. Can you tell us briefly why natural gas is not clean?
Yeah, I can, and this is actually a subject that I love talking about. I think that natural gas is one of the earliest successful examples of what we now call greenwashing, which is where you have something that is very much harmful to the environment, but it is presented as something that is clean because it's better than something else. So because natural gas is not as dirty as coal, we get these claims that it's a clean fuel. We get these attempts by the fossil fuel industry to pair natural gas with renewables, which is where we need to be moving.
Isn't that astounding?
But what a lot of people don't know is that most of the natural gas that we get today is derived from fracking. People know that fracking is a harmful process, but they are not very aware that that is where most natural gas comes from. About 90% of the natural gas wells in this country are fracked today. Yeah. So when you talk about natural gas, it's almost funny because there's nothing natural about it.
That's right, yeah, that's the very term is a misnomer.
Right.
I wonder if you could address another thing. There's a concept that's arisen here with the Tacoma proposal for the LNG facility, and it shows up lots of other places. It's the issue of what's called environmental justice. And can you tell us briefly about the overall concept of what environmental justice is and how it pertains to the Tacoma methanol, or the Tacoma LNG?
Environmental justice is about paying attention to what we call frontline communities, the communities that are most seriously impacted by environmental ills. If you, so those would be, for example, when we have coal trains coming through communities, the frontline communities are going to be the ones who are going to be most affected by the coal dust coming off the coal trains. These are usually going to be lower income communities we see impacted, communities of color. And one critical frontline community is indigenous peoples. And in terms of the Tacoma LNG issue, one of the frontline communities is the Puyallup tribe, whose reservation lands would be impacted by this LNG facility proposal. The facility would be built very close to a Superfund site. And the environmental assessment was very inadequate in terms of investigating what would happen if those soils were dredged up and those toxins were released into the waterway. And so they are very much in opposition to this project. So environmental justice is about taking a look at those frontline communities that are most heavily impacted. If you look at the history of oil spills in Washington state, you will see that the communities that were first on the scene to those oil spills were tribal communities. Very often. So that's why we say that they're a frontline community, because they're often one of the first impacted or one of the heaviest impacted, sometimes both.
Great, thanks. You know, we've been laying out some very heavy stuff, but people should not be discouraged because we've got a lot of victories. And all of us who care about local communities and public health, the environment, and the climate can feel just overwhelmed by all this heavy stuff coming down on us, and overwhelmed by the power of these giant corporations that have many billions, and we have less in our pockets. But we need to recognize that we've won a lot of victories and then build on those successes. And when the Lummi tribe, which is from Whatcom County, Washington State, brought their totem pole through Seattle in 2016, you spoke at a public event there about the victories. And I read the transcript of your speech. I thought, this is we got to mention this during the interview here. Can you just highlight just a couple of and we're running a bit tight on time, but if you can just list a couple of the victories and why are we winning some victories?
Well, there's probably, in the last couple of years, we have probably at the thin green line, meaning all of us here in Cascadia, managed to defeat about 10 coal terminals, 6 or 7 oil by rail projects that would have increased the number of oil trains that were coming through our communities, which is obviously something we don't want. We've defeated a couple of pipelines. Now, this is Oregon, Washington, and BC. Yeah. And so on the one hand, you can talk about how many things are being proposed, but when you look at how many things have actually gotten through, we have a wonderful track record. And one of my favorite quotes, I wish I could remember the name of the gentleman who said it, but this was someone who worked for the oil industry. He said, everyone knows that the Pacific Northwest is where fossil fuel projects go to die. Yeah. And I was very flattered by that.
Yes.
So even though we're seeing this onslaught, we have been very successful in fighting it off.
Yeah. And it's been a lot of people helping in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And we've covered a number of these angles and methods on our program, all nonviolent, of course. In order to win more victories, we need to devise some smart strategies that'll help us reach out to the public, inform people, bring more people into the movement, and help us convince the media and the government to stop the bad stuff and to do the good stuff instead. And how could we devise some smart strategies for outreach and shaping our message around fossil fuels? And then when we get into the democracy aspects of things that Margaret will be informing us about, then she'll get a question like that as well, about how can we devise smart strategies for outreach and shaping our messages about fossil fuels? Yeah,
well, as you already know, since our most recent election, we have seen sort of a groundswell of grassroots organizing. And the thing about the Pacific Northwest is that there was already a very strong existing grassroots organizing vibe going on here that has been going on for many years. And so one of the things that we need to focus on now is focusing on the local level. When you're dealing with fossil fuel projects, you're often dealing with approvals at local, state level, federal level. Yeah. And right now we don't really know where we stand on the federal level, but it's very important for people to realize what powers that they have on the local level and to put their pressure there, because that can be just as effective as stopping a proposal as appealing to the federal level, because any project is going to need all of those approvals.
Yeah, and the tribal level as part of the local, even though they're independent nations, but that's a very local thing, and people often feel warmly about their nearby tribal communities, even if people don't know them, but it's nice to have these folks there because they're paying attention.
And it's important to build those partnerships because they will have a long-standing knowledge of the region and of the issues that are affecting the region.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you can share these insights, and we'll come back to you later on in the interview, but I want to connect with Margaret also about her areas of expertise, because we want to have a more robust and a more authentic democracy, and we want to solve problems so that we can fix this status quo, which is broken in so many ways, and interfering with real democracy. So let me ask you first, Margaret, about Sightline's democracy research team. You've been working on an innovative reform in Seattle that's now being implemented. And when we were preparing for this, you said that in November 2015, Seattle passed a democracy voucher program. It's a smart alternative to big money campaign funding. Tell us about Seattle's democracy vouchers.
Yeah, so Seattle's Democracy Voucher Program is a public funding program for citywide elections. Public funding is not a new idea in the United States. There are 32 jurisdictions across the country that do some form of public funding. Seattle's program is the first of its kind, so it's the first of this model of public funding. And Seattle's program relies on what we're calling democracy vouchers. It's every registered voter in the city of Seattle and any eligible donor, so like a legal permanent resident couldn't vote but could donate. They have all been given $100 of public money to give to a candidate of their choice running for a city office this year.
And it's limited to that kind of it's not like I can take my $100 and go out and have a party for my friends or buy
No, you can't. It
piece
doesn't
of
work.
furniture
It
or
doesn't
something.
work at the grocery store. It only
Right.
works with the candidate who has agreed to be part of the program. And so for a candidate to be eligible to receive that money, they have to agree to certain things, spending limits, caps on how much money, other real money they can take from people, and more transparency about their campaign. So it's a way to encourage candidates to talk to a greater diversity of Seattleites, not just those that have deep pocketbooks, but the actual people they'll be representing.
So rather than just rely on big money people that they can talk with in the back room and have a big exchange of cash under the table, they've actually got to go out and talk to the voters then, because they're going to want to earn those vouchers.
That's right.
It's a whole different kind of campaign than what
Yeah, it's
some
very
people
exciting. For one thing, it means that somebody could run and launch a viable campaign even if they don't know a lot of wealthy people. So this is the first year that Seattle's doing this program. Like you said, it passed in 2015, and now that program's happening this year,
So
2017.
in 2017. So it was not available in the 2016 election?
That's right. The
But
initiative
but
gave the city.
2017, you've got a lot of local campaigns in Seattle for.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the city had like a year to get the program going
okay.
in 2016. So what's exciting is that this program has been enormously successful. I think surpassed anybody's expectations. There have already been almost 10,000 people give donations via these vouchers, and that is more than all of the people gave in 2015 to any city elected official, and that included a mayoral race where you usually see a lot of people giving. So we have just seen so many more people involved as a result of this program.
So that's a good news. That's a success underway. I was disappointed in the November 2016 election that Initiative 1464 in Washington State did not pass. It was close. Can you highlight what some of Initiative 1464 would have accomplished at the state level?
Yeah, 1464 was kind of a similar policy package as we now have in Seattle, but for the state level. So it would have made democracy vouchers, a pretty similar system, available for candidates running for state legislature. And unfortunately, it didn't pass. And I think this is a new idea, this voucher program. And so it requires a lot of communication with people. And I think what's hard about democracy work, it's not hard to convince people that there is a problem. I mean, polling, when you say something like money is a problem in politics, everybody agrees. Everybody agrees. You don't have to fight that battle. What's hard is to convince somebody that you can do something about it. People feel helpless in the face of money in politics. They feel helpless in these big systems that are complicated. And so I think we're seeing that a little bit, and I think that worked against 1464.
I saw a list in, I think, something that you had written about who was opposing 1464. I read it someplace, maybe on a different website. Who was opposing 1464 and why?
It didn't have actually a big opposition movement.
It didn't have a lot of money overtly, from what I said. The supporters contributed generously, but the people who opposed it had some axes to grind, it seemed.
Well, so the 1464 would have been funded by charging out-of-state shoppers sales tax. So if you come from Oregon, where you don't typically have a sales tax, they were exempt from paying sales tax on purchases in Washington. So 1464 would have been funded by charging people who come into the state our same sales tax. So saying you're not exempt just because you come from another state. And so there were some businesses who said that would impact our business. There were a lot of organizations, the Center for State and for Budget Policy, who ran numbers on that, and it didn't seem that it would impact their business almost at all. But that was the only kind of opposition argument that we heard.
I saw some of the opposition propaganda, and it was like they're trying to change the subject and argue against a straw man argument kind of thing, rather than take this on its merits. I just found the opposition propaganda that I saw misleading. Are people thinking about doing something statewide again, like 1464? Are they going to rethink it, or?
At the moment, there's nothing that I'm aware of to revisit the idea of public funding. We've kind of moved our democracy focus to something a little different, which is changing our voting system.
That's our next topic. You must have seen the sequence of questions.
Yeah, so this is just another way that we can get at that issue. You know, we all agree the system's broken, and it's broken in a lot of ways. So one of those is money in politics, and another is how our voting system. And the voting system, as it works right now, it dilutes the voice of a lot of minority voters. It dilutes the voice, really, of anybody who's not in the plurality group. So,
and that means who? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, what I mean by that is the plurality group is the group with the most people, even if it's not the majority of people.
Okay.
And so the way that we do elections in most of the United States favors the plurality group. So that's how you elect somebody without majority support. If 40% of people think one thing, and 60% of people think something else, but they're all split into smaller groups.
Yeah, 15% here, 15% there, 15% here, 15% there,
Right.
adds up to 60%. But if 40% are agreed on something that's the opposite, that minority of 40% wins.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so we're now looking at ways to change that so the plurality group doesn't always win.
So let me ask you about a couple of methods. One is instant runoff voting, which we've talked about in this program, on this series, a number of times over the years. But just so the viewers know, if you have, say, a primary election for governor, for example, you have a whole bunch of people running in the primary, and some people might really prefer this particular candidate, but they know this candidate that I really think is wonderful is just not going to win, but I really don't want this horrible candidate to win, so I'm going to vote for this other candidate who's really not very good, but at least is worse than this really terrible candidate. And the instant runoff voting would get around that in what way?
So instant runoff voting, first I should be clear, instant runoff voting cannot produce proportional results, like I was talking about before.
And we'll get to that in a moment.
What it can do is fix the problem of vote splitting, which is kind of like what you're talking about. So in our current system, you get worried about like the nadir effect. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
It is electing the person you hate because you vote for what we call a third-party candidate. So instant runoff voting allows you to rank your choices. So you could put, if you use the Nader example, you could put Ralph Nader for number one, but that's not going to force you to elect somebody you don't want. You could put a more popular candidate for your second choice. And so if Ralph Nader, he didn't get a lot of votes, okay, so then you get your vote moved. He's out of the race. You get your vote moved to your second choice.
Right.
So you still get a say in who wins, even if your real top choice, the person you really want, they're not going to win.
And this could happen if you have, say, 6 people running in a primary for governor, for example, and maybe your best choice gets the least votes. Well, that person's out, but your vote gets redistributed. All the votes for that candidate get redistributed to those voters' second choice.
That's
and it
right.
goes down until finally the person who gets elected is somebody that people find okay, even if not great.
That's right.
But otherwise, people end up voting against the really horrible ones, and you get stuck with somebody crappy, but just not as horrible as the really horrible one.
Right. So you don't need to be worried about throwing your vote away when you use something like instant runoff voting.
Now, even better is proportional representation, which I know you're enthusiastic about. And that would work especially well for a multi-seat election. So say you have a city council, and you got a city council of 9 people, for example. Tell us how proportional representation might serve democracy.
Yeah, so the idea is that any legislative body should proportionally represent its constituents. So if we go back to the example of, you have 40% of people who think one thing and 30% another and 30% another, then the legislative body, whether that's a city council or the state legislature, should be those percentages.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case in Washington State right now. We have a lot of independents in this state, and very few candidates who run as independent candidates are ever elected.
Well, and we also have some minor parties. So you have a lot of Democrats, you have a lot of Republicans, but you also have some number of Greens, some number of Libertarians, some number of Socialists,
Right.
Whatever. And those people end up with 0, even if they have like 10% of the population.
Right, and that's the idea of proportional representation. It says the legislature should basically be made proportionally to represent the people in the state.
Yeah. So how might that work on, say, a 9-member city council? I know there was a big case in was it Yakima or Kennewick? Yeah.
There was a case in Yakima.
There was a big case, and where they have a huge Latino population, and never any Latinos in the city council, and a number of organizations, including the ACLU, and one that I had represented on our guest list at the program we did in July 2017, was with another group that worked on this as well. That was Bree, and what was the name? It was Justice is in the name of her nonprofit group. Anyway, they worked on this, and they fixed Yakima's electoral process, and now they have a number of Latinas on their city council.
Right, so the case of Yakima it's a really wonderful example. They didn't actually use proportional representation methods to solve their problem.
Yeah, they did it by the district
They
versus
changed the
at-large
districts. That's right.
issue, and that's another remedy.
That is another remedy, and it's working wonderfully now. The problem is that remedy is it's vulnerable to gerrymandering.
Yes.
So in the future, when we redo the districts, what if you don't have a district that's majority Latino? Then you won't be electing a Latino in the future. So that is kind of vulnerable,
Yeah.
which is why we prefer proportional representation.
Okay.
And the way you have to achieve that is electing what we call multi-member districts. So you elect multiple candidates at once.
Yeah, so for example, the city council, like say you had a 9-member city council, instead of having these in 9 different districts, they're all at large for the whole city. And how would proportional representation?
Right, so in Washington State right now, state law requires all representatives to be elected to posted seats, which means you could have 9 districts and you elect 1 person from each district, or you could have an at-large race like you're saying, but even those at-large races would be, we have a race for seat 1, we have a race for seat 2, we have a race for seat 3. In order to achieve proportional results, we need to put all the candidates into one pot, and then let's say we're electing 9, those with the 9 most votes win. That's how you could achieve proportional results.
When we were on the phone preparing for this interview, you said the U.S. is still stuck in 19th century democracy. We are playing catch up to many other democracies in the world. I thought, well, there's a good summary of part of what's wrong is so many other nations have better voter turnout, better representation. They actually have Greens and socialists and right-wing people and everything else mixed in their legislative bodies. They do so many things better.
That's right, that's right. Most other democracies in the world use some form of proportional representation. Almost every country in the EU, Australia does this. And so in Washington State, a big thing we can do is just eliminate this small piece of state law that requires single winner races, single winner districts. And so we're hoping that cities in Washington State will be telling their legislators, we want the freedom to decide for ourselves here at the local level how we run our races.
Yeah. And you had mentioned a few minutes ago gerrymandering, which is the redistricting, drawing the district lines in a way that is deliberately manipulative to benefit one particular political party, for example. And Washington State actually, to my understanding, has a system where it's done in a fair, neutral, impartial way by experts. But in a number of these states that currently have heavy Republican majorities in the legislature, they're drawn in such extremely partisan ways that in some cases courts are saying, this is just too corrupt, we can't allow that. So the gerrymandering problem is a very severe problem in some other places.
Yeah, and I think some people think it's not a problem here in Washington State, and that's not the case. No matter who you give the pencil to draw those jurisdictions, there will be some bias, some way in which those jurisdictions don't represent the full gamut of ideas and types of people in a district.
Yeah. What other creative approaches would you recommend to achieve a more robust and more profound democracy, even beyond electoral matters? How could governments include ordinary people in making governmental decisions better than they do?
Well, I think another big thing, and you brought up how I told you the United States is stuck in 19th century democracy. One thing we do here that most other democracies, many have moved beyond, is we put obstacles up to just being able to vote. So in many countries, all you have to do is be a citizen and you can show up at the poll and vote. Here we create new obstacles. You have to register to vote, and you have to register with such a time before the election.
Yeah.
So another thing we could do to make our democracy more robust is remove those barriers. One idea would be automatic voter registration. So when you go to the DMV to get your driver's license, you show that you're eligible to vote, you're automatically put on the voter rolls.
Yeah. And of course, we're seeing some states that have heavy partisan biases throw up additional barriers so that the kinds of people that they know will vote against them will be screened out because they don't have a driver's license or they don't have whatever. We're running tight on time, so I want to see if we can hit some topics and move fairly quickly. You've suggested some ways to strengthen the democracy. Oh, one other thing I want to mention about what we just said was in some cities in other countries, people actually are setting the city budget in significant ways. They actually have ways of getting people engaged in making budget decisions. Like, whoa, how cool is that? When Tarika and I were talking about strategies for outreach and shaping our messages about fossil fuels, I want to adapt that question to your concerns about democracy. So Margaret, how could we devise smart strategies for outreach and strategies to shape messages to strengthen democracy? What outreach and strategic messaging would be good?
I think it's some similar lessons and ideas to what Tarika was talking about. We need to speak from our values and ground ourselves in those values. So when it comes to democracy, those are things like every person deserves to be represented, every person deserves to be heard, all votes should be equal, people with money shouldn't have a louder voice than people who have smaller means.
Yeah.
So these are the messages that resonate, and then we can talk about solutions.
Yeah. Now, we've had substantive conversation with each of you about your respective areas of expertise, and I want to dig deeper with you folks for if there are additional deeper insights or more powerful strategies beyond what we've said. Anything else come to mind, Tarika, since we had this long chat a few minutes ago?
For strategies?
Yeah.
Well, one thing that we are really looking into doing in the Pacific Northwest, and really this is happening throughout the country, touches on what I was mentioning earlier about working on the local level. And we have fought and been successful in fighting off a number of proposals, dozens and dozens of proposals to site these gigantic fossil fuel terminals here. And so what we are working on right now is how can we be more proactive? How can we stop always being responsive to the next proposal? And so one of the things that we are working on very intently at Sightline is looking at local land use planning. This is a local power that people have.
And people don't realize that, but
They don't.
that's been the way to stop some of these things. When the local government says, our land use planning just won't allow you to do this big oil export thing here.
Exactly. So the power of land use planning includes the power to exclude these the world's largest methanol terminal from being sited in your city.
Yeah.
It includes the power to exclude the largest coal terminal in the United States from being sited in your city. These are things that you can do through the land use planning. And so what we're seeing is people putting proposals forward through their city councils to put limits and restrictions on what type of fossil fuel facilities can be sited in their region. People are looking, they're either looking at what's been proposed in their city already, or they're looking at what's happening in other cities and saying, we don't want that to happen
Yeah, so
here.
you can proactively just do that even before a proposal is on the table.
Exactly. So we've seen progress on that in Portland.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Portland. They said, we're just not going to allow that, any of that kind of crap here in this city.
Exactly. And that was a project that I was very happy to provide some insight and guidance on. And also there's something similar going on in Tacoma right now.
Yes.
There has been a huge groundswell of citizen involvement in Tacoma and saying, you know what, we don't feel that the port is representing us. We don't feel that the city is working to represent us and where we want to go for the future of Tacoma. And so what we would like to do is to, what they are trying to do there also is to use the power of land use planning to say, okay, we're not going to allow ourselves to be a magnet for fossil fuel projects because we're going to prevent these large export terminals from being sited here.
Yeah, yeah. And commonly, city level decisions about zoning and stuff are handled kind of out of the public view. It's boring to most people,
Yes.
so most people don't bother to pay attention to it. But the real estate interests get access, and they do things, and before you know it, there's some horrible thing in your neighborhood.
Right, but it's been really fascinating and encouraging to see everyday citizens coming out, sometimes with their families, to participate in their local democratic processes. It's been very interesting.
Yeah. Margaret, do you have anything else beyond what we've said? Thanks, Tarika. Beyond what we said, do you have anything that's at a deeper level of strategic, how to really turn things?
Well, I think one thing we're excited about for the future, you kind of made a nod to, it's this idea of deliberative democracy.
Yes.
That's a place we'd like to get to.
That would be fun. Years ago, I read about Porto Alegre, Brazil, where they have a process at the municipal level where the citizens are actually engaged in writing the budget. And I read something not too long ago about how they were, the citizens were making decisions to improve their mass transit, their city bus system.
That's right. So deliberative democracy allows citizens, voters, to be really engaged in how what are we gonna spend our money on? They get to be more part of the process and not just receiving the end result.
Passive consumers.
That's right.
Yeah. Some of the viewers might think, how come we're talking about two different things here during this interview? And really, they're both connected.
Right.
And I wonder, could either of you say something about what connections you see between the concerns that each of you has talked about, the remedies, the problems, the solutions?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I'll start and then you can
Yeah,
jump
go
in.
ahead.
Yeah.
Sightline
And
is
we are tight on time, but I want to
Okay.
connect these dots because this is fun stuff.
Well, Sightline's a sustainability think tank. So Sightline started out thinking about environmental issues. And then I think it realized that a lot of the environmental policies that it thought would be robust and be good for this part of the world weren't getting through. And the problem was that our democracy is broken. And so that's where Sightline's democracy program, that's what it was born out of.
Oh, I didn't know that.
A realization that to do anything, to fix anything, you have to work at the root of the problem. And that is how we make decisions as a community.
Yeah, great.
And there are several layers to sustainability, right? So our focus at Sightline is sustainability. In order to have your society be sustainable, the democratic process needs to be sustainable. We, as you already mentioned and everybody knows, we are facing a bit of a crisis there. The environment needs to be sustainable. Another topic that we work on is housing policy.
Yeah.
In order for your society to be sustainable, you need to be able to house the people, and so that they are not dealing on a day-to-day basis with their lower level needs and can actually be contributing to society.
Yeah.
So all these things do connect.
Yeah.
And again, some of the things I mentioned when we're looking at environmental issues is that a lot of it deals with the democratic process and people being able to contribute and add their voice.
Yeah, and I'm always interested in having democracy be more profound than just voting. It's like, okay, I voted, now I'm done for a year. Oh, no, no, no. You got to be involved, you got to pay attention to what's going on, you got to make your voice heard, and you got to discuss the issues with people, and it's an ongoing thing. A couple times already during the program, I've expressed appreciation for Sightline, and I want to put in a little promotion here for Sightline Institute, a nonprofit organization based in Seattle and covers regional, British Columbia and Washington and Oregon. And I just want to support that. I was going to ask Margaret first what people should know about Sightline, and then see if there's anything you want to add, Tarika, about accomplishments, publications, and stuff. So what else should people know about Sightline Institute?
Yeah, so Sightline, as Tarika said, we think about sustainability really broadly, so from an economic, a social, and an ecological perspective. And so we have a number of research teams, and Tarika and I are on 2 different teams. She's on fossil fuels, and I work on democracy, and we work on housing as well, and we work on climate and climate policy. So we really come at the idea of sustainability broadly and bring a lot of different types of thinking to our questions.
Yeah. And so what about Sightline's accomplishments, publications, current work?
Well, we're very lucky to be fairly well respected in the field that we work in, and so there's a lot of places where you can look for our research and input, but I would suggest everyone to go to our website, sightline.org, and to check out some of our topics. One of the main topics I would encourage people to talk about is this concept of natural gas, and why it is that you are seeing a lot of environmental organizations come out so boldly and strongly against natural gas. The main reason, again, being that there's nothing natural about it, and we really need to get an understanding of that as we move forward in our society towards more renewable fuels and more sustainable fuel sources. So that a lot of people are asking questions about, well, I really don't get it. Isn't it cleaner? And if you want to really know the answers to those questions, that's one thing that you can find out at our website.
In preparing for this interview, I read a lot of stuff at your website, including a lot of articles that each of you had written, and it's good stuff. I really enjoyed reading, and everything is well written.
Thank you.
Some sources of information, it's like, don't they want people to read this? You know, this is so tedious. And your stuff, the stuff that each of you has written, plus other people, is like clear. Oh, okay, now I get it. Okay,
well, we want to make it accessible to everyone because
really,
we think that everyone has a role.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to express appreciation for the clarity of writing as well as the substance. People do need good sources of information. I want to mention just a few, and then we'll wrap this interview up. Sightline Institute is in Seattle. They have phone area code 206-447-1880. Website, as we've said a couple times, is www.sightline.org. Regarding both fossil fuels and democracy, a lot of really great nonprofit organizations exist in our region and nationwide. Some provide information, some encourage people to push on different parts of government, some create opportunities for nonviolent direct action, and there are other useful strategies as well. So you can find nonprofit organizations that match your needs and interests and organizing styles. Regarding the climate, we've posted some good sources of information on the climate crisis part of www.olympiafor.org. We had done that probably in about 2015, so you'll have to scroll way down on the climate crisis page of www.olympiafor.org to see a couple of compilations of climate information sources. For information about strengthening democracy, I encourage people to watch the program that we did in this very studio for the July 2017 interview and read the document that I wrote that very thoroughly summarizes what our guests said during that interview. To watch the interview and read the document and the list of resources, visit www.olympiafor.org Click the TV programs link and scroll down to July 2017. To watch the program, click the program title, and to read the thorough summary, including the list of information resources at the end, click the Word document that's just to the right of the program title. And then we have a great statewide organization, Fix Democracy First, that works in a number of ways to reform elections in Washington State. And they're at 206-890-0489, www.fixdemocracyfirst.org. During this hour, we've explored how we can strengthen grassroots movements for two issues among the many issues that we care about. One is protecting our communities, environment, and climate from fossil fuels, and another is reforming several aspects of our electoral systems in order to strengthen democracy. We shared some recent and current progress and some proposals for the work that we should do next. And we explored how to devise smart strategies so we can more effectively inform and engage the public so we can make even more progress. I urge each of us to find one or more ways to inform ourselves and work to solve the problems. Nowadays, people are confronted with many, many serious issues. This TV series has been examining these issues through interviews and helping people work on them for more than 30 years, since 1987. We've addressed the climate crisis and democracy in a number of our previous programs that are still timely today, and you can watch those by visiting the TV programs part of www.olympiafor.org. And you can get information about a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting us at 360-491-9093, and the website again, www.olympiafor.org. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs you and what you have to offer. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.